Okay, we need to talk about Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. Hey everybody, I'm Brad, and if you have followed the channel for a while, I guarantee you've heard me say it several times. For me, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is the single biggest disappointment in the entire Halloween franchise. But not for what it did do, for what it didn't do. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, I have a lot of issues with the creative choices made in H2. But even with all of that being said, it has some of my absolute favorite moments of the entire franchise in it too. Now, I know that the production had its issues with studio interference and the whole thing with the Weinsteins and things like that, but for the most part, I find Halloween 2 disappointing because as a fan and as a teenager back in 2009 who was really looking forward to the release of this movie, I felt like it had so much potential to build on all of the really great things that Rob Zombie did in the 2007 film. And what we got was just kind of a lackluster, we almost touched the sun, and we just completely fell off the horse. Literally. I spent months waiting for that film to come out after the trailer dropped. The whole Rob Zombie completes his extraordinary vision. I mean, it had me so stoked from the minute I saw that awesome trailer drop. The 2007 film was well done. It was well acted, it was well scored, it was well written, and it was well directed. Yet, there were still many issues that Halloween fans had with it, particularly pertaining to Michael's backstory and kind of the white trashness of where Michael came from in that film. But as far as I'm concerned, Rob Zombie took some swings for the fences, and he took some risks when he made that movie. And I think he scored a couple of really important runs. There were a lot of things that movie did really well. Now, with the 2009 film, I was expecting more of that, more of a direct continuation of what Rob Zombie did with the 2007 film, the same atmosphere, the same general approach to the story. But I didn't expect us to just completely go off rails. I expected something a little more along the lines of how Halloween 2 from 1981 was just kind of a direct continuation of what happened in the previous film. It felt the same, it looked the same, it was just kind of a more balls-to-the-wall version of what the first film was. There are about 20 to 25 minutes of pure gold at the beginning of that film. The whole thing where Michael escapes from the van, Laurie being taken into the hospital where she's screaming, her walking out of the hospital room, Octavia Spencer's death, walking through the rain, Buddy, the shack. I mean, all of that was absolutely fantastic. Again, one of my favorite sequences of all 13 movies in this franchise. But unfortunately, after that, as soon as Laurie wakes up from the dream, the entire movie just completely derails for me. Dave McRae says this all the time on his channel. Making movies is really hard, and I wholeheartedly believe that. I am not a director, I am not a screenwriter, I am not an actor, and this is in no way, shape, or form a knock on Halloween 2 2009 and the story and the movie that Rob Zombie made. But as a fan, if there was one thing about the Halloween franchise that I could go back and change, it would be some of the creative choices made in H2. So with all of that being said, here's what I would have done. So for starters, I would keep the majority of the beginning of the movie pretty much the same. Laurie walking down the street on Halloween night, Brackett finding her and taking her to Haddonfield Memorial, Michael escaping the coroner van without Sherry Moon Zombie and the whole white horse thing, but with the Shape killing the driver and just walking off into the foggy night. That's it. We never need to see him making his way to the hospital, entering the hospital, killing patients or doctors or nurses or anybody else in the hospital. Just Laurie waking up, walking out of her hospital room, and finding Octavia Spencer in the nurse's station, stabbed. The Shape is there with her, and it's the same brutal thing that we already got in the film. That's all we need to see. We need nothing more. The chase scene, Octavia Spencer's death, the rain, Buddy, the shack, All of that can stay in the film just as it was, because these moments were really impactful, they were filled with tension, and not to mention, they were scary as hell. Plus, the look of that 2007 mask with the hole in the forehead from the gunshot wounds and the blood splattered down the side of it, that is one of my absolute favorite Myers looks of all time. But with that being said, here's where we start to take a very different direction.
Hello?
After Michael kills Buddy and begins breaking into the shack, just moments before he lifts the axe to kill Laurie, who is at this point still hiding under the desk, BAM! As Michael stumbles forwards, the camera cuts to reveal that Sheriff Brackett has shot Michael in the back. The shape stumbles forwards towards Laurie as she stands and runs around him. Now Michael turns to grab her, but Brackett continues taking shots at him. Some miss, but one lands on his shoulder, another lands in his abdomen, knocking him backwards again. Laurie reaches Brackett as he quickly shoves her into the back of the car and slams the door behind her. And keep in mind, it's pouring at this point. There's thunder and it's lightning and it's storming. It's all super atmospheric and chaotic and tense. The Halloween theme is starting to ramp up. It's a really, really crazy moment. The shape stands back up, grabbing the axe and charging out of the shack towards them. As Laurie enters the car and turns, she realizes that Annie is slumped over in the back seat. Brackett's rescued her still from the hospital, having seen the carnage that was left inside. She's still got her IVs and is bandaged up and everything. I mean, he got her out of there in a hurry. At this point, Brackett is throwing himself into the driver's seat and putting the car in drive as quickly as possible. The shot is positioned from the passenger seat looking out towards the shack, where you can see Buddy's dead body laying on the ground. Michael is still just charging towards the car, and as Brackett speeds away from Michael, he swings the axe just as the police car speeds away, shattering the glass on the left-hand side of the car. And Brackett speeds away out of the gate as Laurie and Annie embrace, crying in the backseat of the car as the Halloween theme is just engulfing the scene. The shape stands there in the rain and he's watching them make their escape. We cut to the three of them escaping from the hospital, speeding through the pouring rain and out into the night through Haddonfield. And there's some dialogue about Brackett getting the three of them out of Haddonfield and that the state police are on their way and that they have backup coming, but it's not here yet. And Laurie asks where Loomis is, but Brackett explains that he was in a hurry to get out of there. He just wanted to get the girls and get out of the hospital, and he didn't find him inside. In the following scene, an older woman watches out the closed blinds of her house, and the news breaks information about what's been happening tonight in the background. Despite Brackett's attempts at locking things up tight, as he says in H2, the news has trickled out amongst the town. She puts the blinds back, and she closes them as several Warren County police cars speed past. Her husband doesn't seem quite as invested in what's happening, drifting in and out of sleep and changing the channels before he settles on George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which of course is my little nod to the original Halloween 2 from 1981. His wife continues to pace around the house. She's nervous, she's checking the locks, she's looking out the windows. She kind of seems appalled that her husband doesn't seem more freaked out by what's happening and by what the news is reporting. And at this point, he almost seems annoyed. He tiredly pleads with her to settle down and just go to bed, but she's super suspicious, and she shakes her head at Mr. Elrod. She rounds the corner of the kitchen to see that the back door is wide open. Rain and leaves begin to blow in as the door slowly swings in the wind, and this is a really super atmospheric, tense moment to just make the pit of your stomach drop. And she freezes. She is petrified. She steps backwards into the living room, and she alerts Howard of what's happened. And he stands up out of the chair. The two begin to kind of look back at the door, and then they slowly walk around the house. And as Mr. Elrod turns and faces the darkened hallway, he looks back at his wife, and then he begins to continue to walk forwards. He reaches the end of the hallway, and he turns around. He's checked the bedrooms. He looks back at his wife, and nothing happens. And then, just then, Michael steps out from behind him from one of the side rooms, and wham! The axe lands one really hard blow into Mr. Elrod's left shoulder. Mrs. Elrod screams as she turns to run, but the shape again is racing towards her. He grabs her, throws her onto the dining room table. There's a struggle happening. He turns to the counter and he looks up, and there's a knife block, and he takes a large kitchen knife from that block. As Mrs. Elrod cries, the shape stabs her in the back, picks her up, a la the nurse in Halloween 2 from 1981, where he kind of lifts her up around the corners. Same idea here. And the scene comes to a close with the Elrods as the shape, soaking wet, dripping with rain and blood and water, drops her to the ground, and he cocks his head as he looks on at what he's just done. As the sound of the police sirens grow nearer, the shape walks out of the back door, back out into the rain, back out into the storm, back into the night, and he just simply vanishes into the darkness. We cut to black. Now, after jumping 1 year later, many things are still very similar to Rob Zombie's version. Laurie still lives with Brackett and Annie outside of Haddonfield in the farmhouse. Michael's still missing and at this point presumed to be dead. Laurie still works with Maya and Harley at the store, and she's in therapy after the events of what happened in the first film. Now, at this point, Brackett is kind of obsessed with keeping Laurie and Annie safe. He's always armed. He doesn't sleep well. They've got bars on the windows. He keeps them home the majority of the time. There's a curfew, even though they're both kind of past that curfew age. And both Laurie and Annie are kind of resentful of this because they want to move on and live their lives. They actually do believe that Michael is dead, even though there's always that PTSD-driven doubt living in the back of their minds, but they want to believe that it's over. They want to move on from this event in any way that they can. All of the side characters are actually still there because Laurie and Annie have kind of grown apart a bit. Annie's become kind of a loner. She doesn't want to go, party and all of these things like Laurie is doing. Annie's not all about death and become goth and all of this stuff. Laurie's kind of on a much more difficult path. She's having a much harder time dealing with the events of what happened, which is why she is in therapy, you know what I mean? But they both want to move on. They have this drive to move on and go somewhere else to explore other things. But Brackett is keeping them on kind of a tight leash. Brackett's fear of something happening to them is almost harming them more than if they would just be allowed to leave and move on with their lives. He wants them to remain this close, tight-knit family, but they're so damaged at this point that it's just kind of making it more of a toxic situation than anything else. In My H2, Loomis is actually Laurie's psychiatrist now. By day, he's a psychiatrist, and by night, he is out looking for Michael. He is just as deranged and paranoid as Brackett is. He's always armed. He spends most of his nights wandering Haddonfield and wandering that whole area in Illinois out in fields with a flashlight looking for people. He's just as obsessed, if not more so, than Brackett of finding Michael. Loomis feels guilt for what's happened. Michael just completely vanished after the events of the 2007 film and the events at the hospital, and it's thrown Loomis into his own personal hell. He's drinking, he's paranoid, he doesn't sleep, he's just not really in a good emotional place. Something very different than the bombastic, egotistical, I want the sizzle, not the steak, that we got in the theatrical cut of H2. All of these characters have experienced some pretty serious physical and emotional trauma, and it's creating a lot of baggage in their relationships with each other and in their life in general. Now, in this version, I think there's a chance to showcase the tragic, more emotionally driven side of Loomis, because if you think back to the 2007 film, one of the things that I thought Rob Zombie did the best was to complicate the relationship between Michael and Loomis. You know, he made Loomis out to be a good guy who really wanted to help him. He didn't just see him as pure evil from the very beginning. Yes, he knew there were some issues there, but I think deep down, Loomis really wanted to help Michael, and he kind of realized that he was too far gone, and he had that purely and simply evil epiphany far too late to do anything. You know, you think about Loomis in the original 1978 film. He just wanted to lock him away and throw away the key. And I think this Loomis had a little bit more heart for Michael than that. And now that what's happened has happened, he's feeling the guilt and the effects of what Michael has done. I mean, I think there's an opportunity in one of these therapy sessions with Laurie. He can reveal to Laurie how much guilt he feels. And, you know, they're almost kind of giving therapy to each other, because they're the two people that are the closest to this, and they can kind of have that conversation with each other. As far as Michael goes, I didn't mind Hobo Myers. The whole ripped mask thing was a little bit too much, but the Shape living off of the land and wearing the tattered jacket and the hood was actually pretty cool looking. You know, throughout the middle of the movie, we can have him living in the woods. He's homeless. He's a drifter, and, you know, do we need to see him eating dogs or sleeping? No. But many of the shots of the Shape walking through cornfields or through trees or beside people's barns or sitting in the barn alone doing nothing, those were actually pretty cool, and I think they can stay in. I think there's a place for those. Even the moment when the rednecks pull up in the truck and they beat him up, that whole action sequence where he goes berserk and he puts the mask on after they beat him, I mean, that was a pretty cool, tense moment. But I do not want to see him eating the dog. That's just it's too much. We don't need to see it. And also, no psychological connection. There is no psychological connection between Michael and Laurie in this movie whatsoever. I also had this idea where Brackett runs into Dr. Loomis in a bar, and you can kind of get the sense that they both frequent this location a lot to kind of drink away their worries and their issues. And the two of them kind of sit and talk about what's happened, and, you know, they talk about their endless pursuit for any information on Michael, and they talk about Laurie and Annie and what they're going to do. And part of Loomis's guilt is not telling Laurie that Michael is her brother. And obviously Brackett is kind of against this. He doesn't want Laurie to know because he thinks it's just going to make the entire situation worse. And that's kind of a point of contention between them as well. Something like that could just give us a little bit of a deeper look into what's going on in those characters' heads. Throughout the film, after he's healed and he's waited and he's contemplated, Michael starts killing again. People in their houses, people out working in their fields, and kind of on the run at a rest stop. You could do something similar to Halloween H2O, and he starts killing people. And Brackett gets wind of this in the coming days before Halloween, and it starts to kind of throw Brackett into a little bit of a frenzy. Laurie finding out that she is Michael Myers' sister is actually a really, really big plot point of Rob Zombie's H2. And that moment being kind of the breaking point, I think that could be one of the most emotional moments in the entire movie. If Loomis, you know, during a really, really heated therapy session, Loomis decides to reveal that to Laurie, that could completely send her kind of on a spiral in the same way that it does in the book, where she kind of storms out of the therapy session and she's in her car and she's crying. I think that could be something really, really, really crazy. And again, it kind of drives a wedge between Loomis and Laurie and Brackett and Laurie, because she feels like they've lied to her. Both of them knew this, and they chose to keep that a secret from her, even though they were both trying to protect her in the process. That's the point where she goes to Maya and Harley to kind of vent and explain what's happened. In the final third of the movie, Laurie leaves with Maya and Harley to go party and kind of drink away her sorrows. And at this point, Annie is at home alone. After Laurie storms in the house and grabs all of her stuff, and her and Annie kind of have that Angel Myers confrontation thing, Laurie storms out. Annie's left alone at the house, and this is where the final act of the movie can really start to play out. Okay, so where does this thing finally end? Well, my ending draws inspiration from two different places. A, from the ending of the 1978 original film, and B, from one of the alternate theatrical posters from H2 in 2009, where the shape is standing out in a pumpkin patch in the middle of the night, and there's lightning and thunder. It's the middle of a thunderstorm. It's such a really cool atmospheric poster, and I kind of wanted to find a way to incorporate that moment into the film. Brackett begins getting calls about the bodies just outside of Haddonfield, and he panics. He comes home to check on the girls, but Annie tells him about Laurie's little Angel Myers emotional outburst, and he seems visibly upset. He knows what this means. As he leaves, he tries to give Annie a gun, but she obviously thinks that he's overreacting. She doesn't think any of this is necessary, and she kind of just disregards his warning. She's refusing to take the gun, and he's disappointed, but he sits the revolver on the counter just before kissing her and walking out the door. Late afternoon, early evening, Michael is walking back towards Haddonfield. He's making his way back towards the town when a car of 4 to 5 teens approaches him, high school students, and they jokingly offer him a ride, kind of a little bit of a callback to Halloween 4. He continues walking. He ignores them. He's uninterested. They're annoyed by his lack of interest in them as they taunt him, and they slowly follow him from behind inside of their car. They begin to taunt him. One of them throws a beer bottle at him, which stops him in his tracks. A buff jock type gets out of the car and challenges him, much to the others' dismay. The other ones are like, okay, we've proven our point, let's move on. And this one football player jock kid walks up to the shape from behind and pushes him. Michael barely budges. The shape turns and picks him up and throws the dude into the windshield of the car. Now, the teenagers are screaming. They're freaking out at this point. From here, we cut between shots of Laurie partying it up with her friends and the shape attacking the Haddonfield high school students. It's really intense, it's really chaotic, and as the teenagers lock the doors of the car as the shape approaches, he quickly begins smashing the windows. He drags one of them out of the window of the car. Another attempts to fight back from inside, but is quickly killed. And then a girl, pretty, blonde hair, one of the ones that was not happy with them taunting this massive dude, opens the car door, falls out onto the ground on the far side of the car. And as Michael reaches in to kill the remaining teen, he turns his head and he sees her running off into the distance, off into the countryside, down the road. And after he dispatches the girl, he takes off after her down the street. There's a little bit of a chase scene, and as she runs, Michael begins to follow her, putting them on a direct course with Brackett's house. As she flees, she sees the house from afar, cutting through the fences, cutting through the field, and then banging on the door for help. Annie, who was just getting ready for her bath the same way that she was in H2, answers the door in her robe. The girl pushes past her and slams the door, locking it behind her. She's shaking, she's crying, she's frantic, and she's scared. And Annie frantically tries to get information out of her. What's happening? Where did she come from? And the girl describes a large man in a cracked white mask. And Annie freezes as it hits her. The color drains from her face. As the two quickly exit the kitchen, Annie turns and sees that the back door of the house is wide open. She cups the mouth of the girl, and they quickly and quietly make their way up the stairs. Annie takes her into the bathroom. She gently closes Laurie's door, trying to be quiet. She locks it. The girl is practically frozen in time. She is shaking, she's sweating, she's crying. Annie tells her to stay put while she goes out to the bedroom to try and find her dad's gun. But when she gets there, she sneaks down the hallway and she realizes that he laid the gun on the counter behind her when he walked out. It's still downstairs on the kitchen counter. After that moment of realization, her heart sinks and she makes her way back down the hallway and to the bathroom to find the teenage girl on the floor. Her neck has been snapped. And as she stands there in shock, she looks up to see that Laurie's door is open. The shape emerges from the darkness and charges towards Annie. Annie's death happens just as it did in the film, just as tragic, just as heartbreaking. By this point, Laurie is making her way back from the party with Maya, where, when they get to the house, she finds Annie upstairs. Michael kills Maya before making his way back into the house, and she still managed to call 911, which means Brackett will still find Annie upstairs, just as he did in the theatrical cut of Rob Zombie's film. Laurie escapes from the house after being confronted by the shape, and Michael chases her through the surrounding fields, back towards Haddonfield. She runs past the town's welcome sign, and as she puts her hand on it, she stops to look around and to catch her breath, but she's getting blood on it. She realizes she's got Annie's blood on her, and at this point, a thunderstorm is starting to roll into the distance. Now, keep in mind, it's starting to turn from light to dark. That thunderstorm is rolling in. There's a little bit of a cool breeze happening. Leaves are blowing everywhere. This is a super fall-feeling scene, and it's really starting to get atmospheric now. Now, obviously, I'm just kind of hitting big plot points here. There is plenty of room to expand upon this story in different ways, but I just wanted to give you a general sense of what I was thinking. The two end up in a pumpkin patch just outside of town. Laurie runs through dozens of pumpkins, tripping on vines, falling as she tries to hide in the darkness and the mud as it begins to rain. She enters a large barn, kind of a callback to Halloween 5, and by this point, Michael is looking for her in the pumpkin patch, behind hay bales, walking through the field, looking around as the rain is pouring down on them. And Laurie realizes that this is her move. She's behind him. He doesn't know where she is. A year of torment and emotional agony. She wants to move on, and this is the only way that she's going to be able to do it. Laurie decides that she is going to attack first. She sneaks out of the barn during this game of cat and mouse between the two of them, and she runs up to him and nails him in the back with the machete, going for another blow, but he blocks her. He's pushing her back. She nails him a couple of times, and the two have this intense confrontation as Laurie continues slashing at her brother. Just as she swings for one final blow at his head, Michael turns and grabs her arm, blocking her. He shoves her to the ground before picking up the machete himself. He begins to walk towards her, and just as the shape goes to land his final blow, Loomis tackles Michael from behind, knocking the three of them forwards down the hill. He tells Laurie to run, but she doesn't listen. As Michael stands, cloaked in darkness and blood and rain, he begins walking towards Dr. Loomis, who is now lying on the ground. The shape presses his foot on Loomis's throat and begins to bear down. He's suffocating him. In moments, he's going to break his neck. Just before killing their doctor, the machete comes piercing through Michael's abdomen. He pauses just before dropping to one knee. Michael attempts to stand, but he fails. He's bleeding. He's hurt. He's done. Dr. Loomis catches his breath. He stands, and he's shaking, but he bends down, stumbling forwards to catch his revolver. He raises it up as he looks at his former patient, and we flash back in black and white to Loomis and Michael sitting in Smith's Grove together. He almost looks disappointed as Dr. Loomis raises the gun and fires 6 shots into Michael's torso. He falls backwards to the ground before falling still. Loomis and Laurie embrace. He asks her if she's okay, and by this point, the police have seen his car out on the road. They've found the car with the teens, and blue and red lights begin to illuminate the distance through the rain and the fog. Illinois State Police officers and Haddonfield officers swarm the scene, and Laurie and Loomis walk towards the flashing lights away from Michael through the rain. We cut to a few minutes later. As Laurie and Loomis sit in the back of the ambulance on the road, She says to Loomis that she once asked him if Michael was the boogeyman. She says that she now knows that he was, but that evil can, in fact, be defeated. As an EMT walks over to continue bandaging Laurie's hand, a wave of doubt washes over his face. He looks off into the distance towards the pumpkin patch and just stares off into the foggy rain. He looks back at Laurie before standing and beginning to walk towards the spot where Michael died. The camera is facing Dr. Loomis, and as he walks towards Michael's body, the camera is zooming in towards him. He's drenched in the cold rain when he suddenly grows super pale. His eyes widen, his mouth opens, and as Loomis begins to look around with the rain dripping down his face, we realize that Michael Myers has once again vanished into the night without a trace. We pull back from Loomis's face, through the thunder, through the lightning, through the rain, which is starting to die off as the Halloween theme begins to play. He's still, he is hopeless. And the scene is opposite of the zoom in on Laurie's face at the end of Halloween 2. Dr. Loomis reaches in his trench coat and pulls out his revolver as we fade to black and the credits begin to roll. Now again, this is just kind of a big picture idea of what I would have liked to have seen as a Halloween fan from H2 back in 2009. This is in no way, shape, or form a knock on Rob Zombie or the script or the story or the movie that he made. I love this movie. There are things that I love. There are things that I hate about it. But this is just kind of a general idea of what I would have liked to have seen if I were the creative mind in control of it. And I know that there are a whole lot of areas that this could be expanded on and added to. But again, it's just kind of big picture plot points of where I would have changed things throughout the story and kind of taken it in a little bit of a different direction. In an alternate universe, maybe this is the Halloween 2 that we could have gotten. But please leave me a comment down below and let me know your thoughts and what you would have liked to have seen from Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 in 2009. It's one of the most divisive and complicated movies in the entire Halloween franchise. And I know that people love it, people hate it, and there are many people kind of in between, just like me. But it's definitely a fun one to talk about, and this has been a blast to kind of write out and kind of plan in my head and think about over the last couple of months. And I've been really excited to share this one with you. So please leave it a like. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. All right, as I sit here and edit this, I wanted to make a little bit of an addendum to that video. I filmed this a while ago, and it's taken me this long to edit just because it's been one of the most involved edits I've ever done for any project on the channel. And I just want to be 100% clear that this video and this new idea for a story was not in any way a dig at what Rob Zombie did with H2, because I do have a lot of respect for Rob Zombie as a filmmaker. I think as a writer and as a director, I think he has a really, really special way of bringing his ideas to life, and I think he's really, really effective at showcasing the kinds of things that he wants to showcase. And it's obvious that I have a love for this movie. I mean, it's got one of my favorite masks in the franchise. It's got some of my favorite character development in the franchise. But being the divisive entry that it is, I thought, hey, I wanted to make a video that showcased a little bit of what I was expecting and kind of what I've thought about over the years, and like, wouldn't it be kind of cool if it did this? Like, this is basically the Marvel's what if version of Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And like I said earlier in the video, there are plenty of different avenues to expand on this. I know I didn't really touch a whole lot on Loomis in this. And I mean, there are 100 different ways that you could expand what I've said in this video. I thought this would be something different and cool, kind of like if you opened up the Michael Myers multiverse. Maybe this is one of the things that would have happened or could have happened within that multiverse. So I wanted to make a little bit of an addendum and say that. just because I don't want people to hop on the comments and be like, you hate Rob Zombie, you hate Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, you hate his films. Like, I don't hate his films. I disagree with some of the creative choices made in his films. I mean, I will say that. But I'm glad it exists the way it is. I'm glad that both versions of Halloween exist in the way that they do. I think this movie adds a lot of fun conversation and a lot of fun lore to the franchise and to the fandom. I mean, I just made a 35-minute video about this, you know, so it's a special entry in the franchise for me. And we talked about that a lot on our last live stream with Nick from the Lost River Drive-In and Brett Mann from Good Real Hunting. I mean, I encourage you to go back and listen to that. We talked about H2 quite a bit and about Rob Zombie's films, and I know he went through hell to get his Halloween films made with the Weinsteins and with Dimension and Mary. It was a whole big thing. And I wanted to be clear that this is not a knock on Rob Zombie or what he did with H2, because I do have a lot of love for that movie. So thank you for watching. This was a really long one, and I thank you so much for sticking with it to the end. Please, again, like I said a minute ago, if you would leave me a comment down below, let me know your thoughts on my vision, on what another possible avenue that Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 could have gone. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know. Leave this one a like. We have got new horror content coming the entire month of October. We're in the middle of the second annual Let's Talk Movies Oktoberfest. It's been an absolute blast in its first week, and I wish you the best Halloween season. I wish you the best, and we love you. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at LTM Podcast KY, and we'll see you in the next one, guys. Have a good one. Happy Halloween. Peace.